Welcome to Unwrap Reality, where we narrate stories on things that happen in real life.
How social media ruined my relationship and what I learned. I can't believe I'm even saying this out loud, but here we are. Once I start, there's no turning back, right? My name is Maya, and I'm 28 years old. I live in a small town outside of Chicago, where life moves at its own pace, except for me. For years, I thought I was some sort of social media rock star. Every mundane detail of my life became a highlight reel. Coffee runs turned into latte art masterpieces. Grocery shopping became farm-to-table adventures. And lazy Sundays somehow morphed into self-care Sundays. It wasn't just about sharing moments. It was about proving something. To myself, to others, maybe even to the universe. I convinced myself that if I could just hit that next milestone of likes or followers, I'd finally feel like I mattered. But deep down, I knew better. Behind every perfectly filtered photo was a girl who felt like she had something to prove. Growing up, I was always chasing validation, from teachers, friends, family, and when social media came along, it felt like the ultimate stage. The more people liked my posts, the more I believed I was winning at life. And trust me, I wasn't shy about broadcasting it. But what happens when your online persona starts overshadowing your real one? When you're so busy curating perfection that you forget how to live authentically? That's where my story begins. Or maybe ends. Either way, it's messy, raw, and uncomfortably honest. Then 5 years ago, everything changed. I met Ethan at a casual birthday dinner for a mutual friend. He was different from anyone else I'd ever dated. Calm, grounded, almost infuriatingly content with his simple life. At first, I thought he might be exactly what I needed. A stabilizing force to balance out my chaotic need for external approval. But as time went on, I realized our differences weren't just quirks, they were cracks waiting to split us apart. What started as a connection filled with laughter and ease slowly unraveled into something far more complicated. And now, looking back, I wonder if I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. All because I couldn't stop chasing a dream that didn't even exist. Maya's rise as an influencer. When I first dipped my toes into the world of social media, it felt like I had unlocked some secret cheat code to life. Every mundane moment became a potential masterpiece. Every latte turned into art, every outfit into a fashion statement, and every random thought into wisdom worth sharing. At 23, I was obsessed with building this online persona that screamed, "I have my life together." The truth? I didn't. But who cared about the truth when you could craft something better? My feed was a highlight reel of perfection. Perfectly posed selfies, aesthetically pleasing flat lays, and captions that oozed confidence. People ate it up. Followers poured in, comments flooded my posts, and suddenly I wasn't just Maya from a small town outside Chicago. I was Maya, the girl everyone wanted to be or be friends with. But here's the thing about chasing validation. It's addictive. One like wasn't enough, I needed hundreds. One comment saying your goals wasn't enough, I craved thousands. It wasn't about connecting with people anymore. It was about proving something. To myself, to others, maybe even to the universe. If I could just hit that next milestone, 10K followers, 50K followers, whatever, it would mean I mattered, that I was worthy. Looking back now, I can see how hollow that mindset was. But at the time, it consumed me. Social media wasn't just a hobby. It was my identity. And if I'm being brutally honest, it shaped how I viewed relationships too. Including the one I had with Ethan. Ethan came into my life during those early days of my influencer journey, right when I was starting to gain traction online. He didn't care about hashtags or filters, which should have been refreshing, but honestly, part of me saw it as a flaw. Don't get me wrong, I liked him. Actually, I more than liked him. There was something magnetic about his calm demeanor, his ability to find joy in the simplest things. While I was busy curating moments for Instagram, he was content sitting on his couch watching documentaries or strumming his guitar. It was grounding. For a while I convinced myself that dating someone so different from me was exactly what I needed. Someone to balance out my chaos. Someone to remind me there was more to life than likes and shares. But deep down, I knew our differences weren't just quirks. They were cracks waiting to form. Because no matter how much I admired Ethan's laid-back approach to life, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't living up to the image I had in my head. Not the image of who he was, but who he could be, or rather, who I wanted him to be. I started dropping hints early on, subtle nudges disguised as playful suggestions. Hey, have you ever thought about starting a YouTube channel? Or, wouldn't it be cool if we traveled somewhere exotic? Each suggestion was met with a polite smile and a shrug. Maybe someday, he'd say. Someday never came. And as time went on, that gap between us, the one I tried to ignore, only grew wider. Because the reality was, I wasn't just building an online persona for myself. Without realizing it, I was trying to build one for Ethan too. I wanted him to fit into this perfect picture I had in my mind. A picture where we were couple goals, where our lives looked enviable to anyone scrolling through their feed. But Ethan? He wasn't interested in playing along, and that's where the trouble really began. Meeting her partner. When I first met Ethan, it felt like the universe had finally decided to throw me a bone. It was at this casual birthday dinner for a mutual friend. Nothing fancy, just a group of people laughing, eating takeout pizza, and sharing stories. He was sitting across from me, quietly sipping on some soda, looking completely unbothered by the chaos around him. At first glance, he didn't seem like someone who'd catch my attention. He wasn't flashy or loud. In fact, he barely said anything during the first hour. But there was something about him, this calm energy that made me curious. So, naturally, I leaned over and asked him what he did for work. I'm a musician, he said with this easy smile, like it was no big deal. And honestly, that threw me off guard. Musicians were supposed to be dramatic, intense, maybe even a little self-absorbed. But Ethan, he was none of those things. We started talking more after that night. Well, talking might be an understatement. I basically grilled him about his life. Turns out, Ethan wasn't trying to make it big or chase fame. He played gigs here and there, wrote songs when inspiration struck, and spent most of his time teaching kids how to play guitar. It sounded simple. Too simple if I'm being honest. But the more he talked, the more I realized how much I admired that about him. While I was busy obsessing over metrics, likes, shares, followers, he seemed content living in the moment. There was no pressure to prove himself, no need to constantly perform. For someone like me, who lived and breathed validation, it was almost refreshing. Almost. At first, I convinced myself that dating Ethan could balance me out. Yin and yang kind of thing. I thought his chill vibe would rub off on me, help me slow down and appreciate the little things. We went on these low-key dates, grabbing coffee at hole-in-the-wall cafes, wandering through thrift stores, binge-watching old sitcoms in my cramped apartment. On paper, it probably sounded boring, but honestly, it felt nice, comfortable. Like I could breathe for once without worrying about curating the perfect experience for social media. For a while, I let myself believe that maybe this was enough, that maybe I didn't need all the glitz and glamour I'd been chasing. But deep down, I knew better. Even as I enjoyed those quiet moments with Ethan, part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Not from him, necessarily, but from us. Because while Ethan was happy existing in his own little world, I was still stuck in mine. A world where success was measured in numbers, where relationships needed hashtags to feel real. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself that love didn't have to look like the couples I followed online. But the truth was, I wanted both, the comfort Ethan offered and the excitement I craved. And as time went on, that gap between us, the one I tried so hard to ignore, only grew wider. Because the reality was, Ethan wasn't interested in playing along with my vision of perfection. He didn't care about staging photo shoots or crafting witty captions. To him, life wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about living authentically. And while that should have been exactly what I needed, it only highlighted everything I feared, that maybe I wasn't enough as I was. That maybe the person I was pretending to be online was the only version of myself worth loving. Looking back now, I can see how unfair that mindset was to him and to me. But at the time, I couldn't let go of the idea that happiness required something bigger, something shinier, something Ethan wasn't willing to give me. The illusion of perfection. At first, I thought Ethan and I were a match made in heaven. He was my grounding force, the calm to my chaos, the person who reminded me that life didn't need to be lived under a microscope. But as time went on, I started noticing things, little cracks in the foundation of our relationship that I tried to ignore. It wasn't anything dramatic, just subtle signs that maybe we weren't as aligned as I'd convinced myself we were. For instance, Ethan would come home from work, plop down on the couch, and stay there for hours. At first, I told myself it was fine, he worked hard, he deserved to unwind, but deep down, it bothered me. To me, it felt like he was mentally checked out, like he wasn't striving for more. And that scared me. You see, while Ethan was content with his simple life, I was scrolling through Instagram, watching other couples post about their glamorous vacations, their trendy outfits, their seemingly perfect lives. I couldn't help but compare us to them. Why weren't we doing more? Why weren't we traveling or upgrading our apartment or starting some side hustle to make extra cash? I'd drop hints here and there. Hey, have you thought about asking your boss for that promotion? Or wouldn't it be cool if we saved up for a trip somewhere exotic? Ethan would just shrug and say something like, maybe someday. Or, let's focus on what we have right now. His calmness infuriated me. Didn't he understand that life was supposed to be about growth, about reaching for something bigger? So I started staging moments instead of living them. If I couldn't have the life I wanted, I could at least make it look like I did online. I'd drag Ethan to trendy cafes on Saturday mornings, snap a dozen photos of us sipping lattes, and post them with captions like quality time with my favorite person. In reality, Ethan would have been just as happy grabbing coffee from some dingy diner down the street. But I didn't care about authenticity. I cared about appearances. I wanted people to think we had it all together, that we were one of those couple goals duos everyone envied. And for a while it worked. My posts got likes, comments, even shares. People ate it up, and I soaked it all in, like it was validation for my entire existence. But the more I leaned into this illusion of perfection, the more distant Ethan became. He stopped making those small gestures that used to make me feel loved. No more surprise grocery runs, no more random funny memes sent during my stressful workdays. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was just being lazy or ungrateful. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was pushing him away, not because he wasn't good enough, but because I was trying to mold him into someone he wasn't. I wanted Ethan to be ambitious, to chase goals I deemed worthy, to fit into the narrative I was crafting for us. And when he refused, I resented him for it. Looking back now, I can see how unfair that was, to him and to us. But at the time, I was too blinded by my own insecurities to realize what I was doing. The breaking point. It's funny how one moment can change everything. One careless comment, one poorly timed joke, and suddenly the foundation you thought was solid starts to crack. That's what happened the night of Tara's party. A small gathering with about 10 people, nothing fancy, just some drinks, music, and everyone joking around. We were playing one of those group games where you go around the circle answering random questions. When it was Ethan's turn, someone asked, "What's the biggest achievement you've had in the past 3 years?" I didn't think much of it at first. Ethan paused for a second, shrugged, and said, "I guess getting married to Maya was a pretty big deal for me." It was an honest answer, simple and straightforward. But instead of letting it slide, I felt this strange mix of embarrassment and frustration bubbling up inside me. "Oh, come on," I blurted out, laughing, but with an edge that made the room go silent. "That's basically your only accomplishment, right?" Everyone froze for a second, and I immediately tried to laugh it off, acting like it was just playful teasing. But I could see something shift in Ethan's face. He didn't say anything, but his expression told me everything. He realized in that moment that maybe I didn't respect him as much as I claimed to. Someone tried to lighten the mood, saying, "Ashley, you're harsh," but the damage was done. For the rest of the night, Ethan barely spoke, and when we got home, he looked at me and asked, "Do you really think I haven't done anything except marry you?" I got defensive, of course. "Why are you so sensitive? It was a joke," I snapped, brushing it off like it wasn't a big deal. But deep down, I knew it was a big deal. That comment wasn't just about Ethan's accomplishments. It was about how I viewed him, how I'd been viewing him all along. In my head, Ethan was this laid-back guy who didn't strive for more, who was content with mediocrity while I was out here chasing dreams and building a life worth envying. The truth was, I resented him for not being ambitious enough, for not wanting the same things I did. And that resentment had been simmering under the surface for months, maybe even years. That night, it boiled over. Ethan went to bed without another word, and for the next few days, the tension between us was unbearable. I tried to distract myself by posting pictures from the party, carefully selecting the ones where we looked happiest. I wrote some sappy caption like, "Loved spending the evening with my favorite guy." I wanted to control the narrative, to make it seem like everything was fine. But behind closed doors, Ethan withdrew even further. He stopped surprising me with little gestures. No more coffee runs, no more funny memes sent during stressful workdays. It was like he'd given up trying to please me. Part of me felt guilty, but another part was annoyed that he was acting so dramatic over one silly joke. At least that's how I justified it in my head. Looking back now, I can see how unfair that was. To him, and to us. Life after Ethan. Leaving Ethan felt like stepping into a void I hadn't prepared for. At first, it was exhilarating, the rush of freedom, the sense that I could finally live my life on my terms without someone holding me back. I told myself this was exactly what I needed. Space to grow, to explore, to become the person I always dreamed of being. But reality has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. Within weeks, the cracks in my perfect plan started showing. Living with my friend Rachel wasn't as glamorous as I'd imagined. Her couch became my bed, her cramped apartment my new home base. It wasn't just the lack of privacy, it was the constant reminder that I had walked away from stability for something I couldn't even define. And then there were the bills. Oh, the bills. Without Ethan splitting rent and utilities, every expense hit harder than I anticipated. I tried to keep up appearances, though, posting pictures of nights out, trendy coffee shops, anything to prove I was thriving. But behind those filtered photos was a girl scraping by, spending money she didn't have to maintain an image no one truly cared about. My bank account dwindled faster than I expected, and soon I found myself rationing grocery trips and skipping meals just to make ends meet. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was chasing some grand influencer lifestyle while struggling to afford basic necessities. Meanwhile, Ethan, he seemed fine, too fine, honestly. He didn't call or text, didn't beg me to come back like I secretly hoped he would. Instead, he quietly paid our shared apartment's rent alone, moved on with his quiet, predictable life, and left me to figure out mine. The loneliness crept in slowly at first, like shadows stretching across a room as the sun sets. During the day, I filled my time with distractions, work, social media, aimless scrolling. But at night, when the noise faded, all I could think about was how empty my life felt. I missed the little things most. Waking up next to someone who knew me inside and out, sharing inside jokes over cheap takeout, even arguing over whose turn it was to do the dishes. Those moments weren't perfect, but they were real. Now, all I had were staged photos and captions that rang hollow the moment I hit post. Friends noticed too. People in our circle started asking questions. Are you guys okay? What happened between you two? I brushed them off with vague answers, pretending everything was fine, but deep down, I was waiting. Waiting for Ethan to realize he couldn't live without me, to show up at Rachel's door, begging for forgiveness. Spoiler alert, he never did. One text exchange stands out in my mind, haunting me even now. After months of silence, I sent him a message late one night, drunk on cheap wine and regret. "Don't you miss me?" I asked, half expecting him to pour his heart out, to tell me how much he loved me and how empty his life was without me. His reply came quickly, cutting through my delusions like a knife. "I miss who you used to be, not who you are now." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. They stung because they were true. Somewhere along the way, I had changed, or maybe I had been pretending all along. Either way, the version of myself that Ethan fell in love with was gone, replaced by someone obsessed with external validation and blind ambition. For days after that, I replayed his words in my head, trying to convince myself he was wrong. But the truth lingered, gnawing at me, forcing me to confront the possibility that I might have ruined the best thing in my life. And for what? Life after Ethan. Weeks turned into months, and the reality of my choices started to sink in. At first, I convinced myself that leaving Ethan was some grand act of self-liberation, a bold move toward finding the life I truly deserved. But as time dragged on, that illusion began to crumble. Living with Rachel wasn't glamorous. Her couch became my bed, her cramped apartment, my temporary refuge. It wasn't just the physical space that felt suffocating. It was the emptiness inside me, the gnawing sense that I had made a colossal mistake. I kept posting pictures online, trying to project this image of independence and freedom, but behind every filtered photo was a girl who couldn't afford groceries without counting coins. Then there were the nights, the quiet, unbearable nights when the noise faded, and all I could think about was Ethan. I missed him more than I cared to admit. Not the version of him I tried to mold into something he wasn't, but the real Ethan. The guy who brought me coffee when I was stressed, who sent me memes during long workdays, who laughed at my silly jokes even when they weren't funny. Those little moments used to feel mundane, almost insignificant, but now they haunted me. They reminded me of what I had thrown away, all because I wanted something shinier, something bigger. And for what? A handful of likes? A fleeting sense of validation from people whose opinions didn't matter? The turning point came one evening when I stumbled across an old photo of us together. It wasn't staged or perfectly lit. It was just us, sitting on our tiny couch, laughing over some dumb TV show. In that moment, I realized how much I had taken for granted. Our life wasn't perfect, sure, but it was ours. It was real. The fights, the compromises, the quiet moments. They were all part of something authentic, something worth holding on to. But instead of cherishing it, I treated Ethan like he was disposable, like he needed to earn his place in my life by fitting into my narrow definition of success. I told myself I deserved better. But looking back now, I see how wrong I was. Ethan gave me stability, love, and respect, and I repaid him with resentment and manipulation. What hurt the most was realizing that Ethan probably moved on without me. He stopped texting, stopped reaching out, stopped caring. Or maybe he never stopped caring, but he finally accepted that I wasn't coming back. That thought terrified me. For so long, I assumed Ethan would be the one chasing me, begging me to return, proving his love in ways I deemed worthy. But the truth hit me like a freight train. Ethan didn't need me anymore. He was fine without me, living his simple, content life while I spiraled further into regret and loneliness. The worst part? I couldn't even blame him. If anything, I admired him for letting go, for having the strength to walk away from someone who clearly didn't value him enough. And yet, despite everything, I still clung to fragments of denial. Maybe Ethan would call someday, say he missed me, ask me to come back. Deep down, though, I knew better. This wasn't a fairy tale where the hero comes riding in to save the day. No, this was real life, and in real life, actions have consequences. My pride wouldn't let me reach out, my ego wouldn't let me apologize, and my fear wouldn't let me face the possibility that I might have ruined the best thing in my life forever. So here I sat, stuck in this limbo of regret and longing, wondering if I'd ever find the courage to own up to my mistakes, or if it was already too late. Looking back now, I can see how much of my life was built on illusions of success, happiness, and love. I chased a version of myself that didn't exist, a shiny, filtered persona I thought would bring me fulfillment. But the truth is, no amount of likes or comments could ever fill the void I felt inside. What scares me most isn't just losing Ethan. It's realizing that I might have thrown away something real for something imaginary. Something I invented in my head because it looked better on paper or on Instagram. Ethan wasn't perfect, but he was good. He was kind, patient, and content with the simple things in life. And instead of appreciating those qualities, I resented them. I wanted him to be ambitious, to chase goals I deemed worthy, to fit into the narrative I had crafted for us. When he refused, I treated him like he was holding me back, like he wasn't enough. The irony is almost unbearable now. I accused him of being complacent when, in reality, I was the one stuck. Stuck in this endless cycle of comparison, dissatisfaction, and ego. The hardest pill to swallow is knowing that Ethan probably moved on without me. He paid our shared apartment's rent alone, quietly let me walk away, and never begged me to come back. At first, I told myself he was heartless, that he didn't care. But deep down, I know the truth. He cared too much. He loved me enough to let me go when I made it clear I wasn't happy. And maybe, just maybe, he realized he deserved someone who respected him for who he was, not someone who tried to change him into something he wasn't. That thought terrifies me, because it means I lost not just a partner, but a genuinely good person. So here I am, sitting in this cramped living room at 2 a.m., telling you all of this like we're old friends. Because honestly, I don't know who else to tell. Everyone else would judge me, and maybe they should. I joked that Ethan's biggest accomplishment was marrying me, and now I'm the one who walked out. People probably hate me for it, and maybe that's fair. But what haunts me most is the possibility that I'll never get another chance. To apologize, to make things right, to prove that I've changed. Maybe I don't deserve one. After all, sometimes we destroy the very thing we claim to want, and only realize it when it's too late.